Well, good morning. It is great to see each of you in the house of the Lord this morning, and welcome to those that are joining us online as well. Good to see a number of, I call them guests or visitors, but ones that we haven't maybe seen for a little while. A couple new faces as well, and so welcome to each of you. If you are a first-time guest with us, I would love for you at some point in the service to find a Connect card there in front of you. There's also some on the Connection Center desk. If you would just fill out whatever information you're willing to share with us, I would greatly appreciate it. Maybe it's been a little while since you've been here. Perhaps maybe even have moved since you were here last. If you could give us any updated information, that would also be helpful and much appreciated. Any first-time guests with us, love for you to stop by the Connection Center because we have a gift that we'd like to give to you. Our way of saying thanks for being with us in worship today, and something that I believe you will find of great value in the days ahead. How many of you have ever said, or at least thought, that's not fair? How many of you ever said it? Ever said it, or at least thought it? That's not fair. How many of you maybe even this week something happened? Maybe it was at work, maybe it was at home, whatever the case is. Maybe it was the McDonald's line. And like, that's not fair. Any of you? Like this week? Yeah? How many of you have said at some point, that's not fair, and you had the reply, something of the sort, suck it up, buttercup, life's not fair? How many of you have had that? How many of you have said that to somebody else? Or at least wanted to say that to somebody else? Like, okay, I'm not going to burst their bubble or whatever, I'm not going to be that person, and maybe you were like, forget it, I'm telling them life's not fair. And we tell our children that maybe, or whoever, or I've heard it in classes. I was accused this week. I had a student in one of the classes, like they had asked permission to do something, and I had said no. A little bit later, another student asked, some time had gone by, and I gave permission to that student to do something, and the other student raised their hand, and Mr. Wyatt, I have an issue with you. Okay? You let her do it, but you told me no. Essentially what she's saying, that's not fair. And to be fair, she had a point. She caught me. Okay, and what can I do, right? Last week at our food distribution, word got back to me, we were trying something new. I put it in the notes, the Facebook messages. We're experimenting with running 2 lanes. We've been running 1 lane for the last couple years, and as the food distribution has grown, we've had very long lines out on the Washington Street. Like, let's try to remedy that as much as we can. Let's have 2 lines here on the property. We'll give that a try, and then we'll zipper merge them at the distribution site. We'll give it a try. Well, there were some that did not think that that was fair because they pulled up in one line and another line was shorter, and so somebody else was getting ahead of them. They got to move in front, and so when it was time for registration and they're giving their paper, they're letting their registration people know, well, hey, they cut in front of me. Those 3 cars right there, they cut. I'm like, that's not fair. I'm like, everybody's going to get the same thing. Like, they could have pulled over and stuff, and like, whatever. But that's not fair. And like I said, you know what? I didn't say this to them, but I told the registration people, basically, life's not fair. It'll work out. They'll be okay. And if people want to complain too much, just put a upside-down smiley face on their car, and I'll pick the other car in line to go in front of them. Again. Because I'm petty that way. I don't know. And surely there have been times, as I said, even this week, where I could be blamed for not being fair. And I think it's well established that we kind of just recognize that there are times in life where life is not fair. But I think we want to know the question, is God fair? Is God fair? And in Matthew chapter 20, it's page 697, if you want to grab a KWC Bible. If you brought your own Bible, awesome. If you want to pull out your phone, as long as you're not playing Wordle or some other game, although maybe for some people you can multitask, and playing a game on your iPhone helps you to pay attention. I don't really believe that that's the case, but perhaps, maybe for some of you that would be the case. But if you want to pull up the Bible app and follow along on the Bible app, you go ahead and do that. I'll have the words, Lord willing, up on the screen. But I do think that there is value in being able to have it right there in front of you yourself so that you can read right along and see what Scripture says there for yourself, not just trusting that we've got it right on the screens, but that you're familiarizing yourself either with your own Bible or the Bible app, or if you like, a KWC Bible. That all said, before we look at what Matthew chapter 20 says in verse 1, we've actually got to go back, in my opinion, to chapter 19, verse 30, the last verse that we looked at last week, because as I shared last week's message and this week's message really dovetail together. They go hand in hand, so much so that there was a thought, a fleeting thought, but a thought of preaching the two passages in one passage. But I know that I press things enough as it is on time, and don't want to take advantage of your generosity and your kindness. And so I split it into two. But we do need to go back to the last verse from last week to pick it up, to launch us into chapter 20, because they are most definitely connected, as we will see as we continue on. But Jesus says this, but many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. Jesus said that on the heels of Peter asking the question, we've given up everything to follow you. What's in it for us? That's the Len Wyatt paraphrase. What will we get? In essence, the question that we looked at last week, is it worth it? And Jesus goes on to answer Peter's question, is it worth it, with a resounding yes. Here's how it's worth it. Here's why it's worth it. And gives him some tremendous assurance that it is most definitely worth it to give your whole life, everything that you have, to follow Jesus. But then Jesus ends with this statement, but many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first, because Jesus wants Peter to know something far beyond just the assurance that it is worth it to follow him. Jesus wants Peter to understand something about the kingdom, because there's something behind Peter's question that needs to be addressed. Beyond a question of faith, beyond a little bit of doubt, like is it worth it, or uncertainty of is it worth it to follow Jesus, there's something in Peter's heart, much like it's quite possible there's something in your heart and perhaps in my heart that Jesus needs to address beyond just the question of, is it worth it? There's the question, is God fair? And there's even something behind that question that Jesus will address as he addresses the question, is God fair? So we pick it up, Matthew chapter 20, verse 1. And Jesus gives a parable. A parable is a kingdom story. He says this, For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed. Everybody say agreed. He agreed to pay them a denarius. Just so we all know, because this is pretty important to the parable, the story that Jesus is telling to provide a kingdom truth, something that the average person of that day could relate to, so that they could better understand the kingdom of God, to which Jesus is calling you and I to be a citizen of, to live as a citizen of. What does that look like? Well, a denarius is essentially a day's wage at that time. So now it would be one thing, and so it's hard to put a numerical value on something because that changes. If I was to ask how many of you started working for maybe like $1 an hour, or maybe even less than $1 an hour, there would be several of you, no doubt, that would raise your hand. When I started working, I got paid $3.20 an hour. As I told one of the classes this last week, yes, I'm older than dinosaurs. I had somebody show me a picture of a telecommunication object from the 1800s in one of the classes that I subbed for this last week. And like, Mr. Wyatt, were you around when these were being used? Thank you very much. But the big idea that we need to just keep in mind is in the story that Jesus is telling about the landowner easily represents God. And God has offered, the landowner has offered, agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. So that's where we start. A day's work and a day's pay. You give me a day's work, I'll give you a day's pay. Does that sound fair? Sounds pretty fair to me. We continue. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right. I'll give you what is fair. I'll make it worth it. Okay? So they go out. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon. So he goes out early in the morning, maybe 6 a.m. He goes out about 9 a.m. He goes out at noon. He goes out again at 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? Because no one has hired us, they answered. He said to them, you also go and work in my vineyard. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last. Does this sound a little familiar? Matthew chapter 19, verse 30. But the first will be last, and the last will be first. So beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. We see a connection to Matthew chapter 19, verse 30, right? The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So those that started at 5 p.m., the last group hired, got paid what the first group had been promised to and what they had agreed for their day's wage, right? You give me an honest day's work and I'll give you an honest day pay. You get a denarius. Those that start at the beginning, you'll get a denarius. We don't see what is promised to the second group, the third group, the fourth group, or the fifth group that is now being brought for payday. But they get a denarius. They get a full day's wage. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? How many of you would love a job like that? Show up at 5 o'clock and get paid for a full day's wage. Like, sign me up for that. I like that. So when those who were hired first came, they expected to receive more. Right? I mean, think of it, the logic. How many of you, if you were in their shoes, you'd expect to get paid more? Like, well, if they got paid that much for working whatever it was, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, whatever, how much more will I get paid? Since I've been working since like 6 o'clock in the morning. But each of them also received how much? A denarius. So those that started work at 5 p.m., what did they get? A denarius. Those that started work at like 6 in the morning, what did they get? A denarius. Sounds pretty equal to me. They got the same thing. Does it sound equal to you? Does it sound fair to you that one would get the same for working maybe a couple hours as those who worked like 12 hours, maybe even more, would have gotten? Well, when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. I love the word grumble. In the English language, grumble's a pretty fun word to say. You guys go ahead and say it. Grumble. Even in the English language, grumble is an onomatopoeia, right? It sounds like what it's describing. Grumble. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Grumble, 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 grumble. How many of you have heard somebody grumble in the last week? Grumble, grumble, grumble. How many of you have grumbled in the last week? Grumble, grumble, grumble. Right, you know, maybe it was at work, maybe it was at school, maybe it was at home, whatever, but grumble, grumble, grumble. Well, in the Greek, it's gongozo. Gongozo, gongozo, gongozo. It's this murmuring. The sound of cooing doves is how it's described. To murmur or mutter, to grumble, with muffled undertones. It means to show smoldering discontent. I love that definition, that description. Smoldering discontent. Droning on in a low, constant murmur. They're grumbling against the landowner. These who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. When it came to pay, you paid them the same amount, and that's not fair. That they were paid the equal amount because they didn't do equal the work. And you probably would be thinking the same thing as the workers who were hired first. That doesn't seem fair. And that, again, may lead us to ask, so is God fair? And I would say that's a fair question based on what we see on the surface of this parable. But Jesus is going to help us to dig in a little bit deeper to the parable. Here's how he responds. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. So how does God answer the question, is God fair? God would say, yeah, I'm fair. Here's his argument. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Did they agree to work for a denarius? Absolutely. So the landowner says, take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Like, that's his prerogative. He goes on, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? You're claiming about something being unfair, but I have the right to do whatever I want to do with my money. I agreed to something. I fulfilled my agreement. I upheld my agreement with you. I did what I said I would do. don't I have the right to do whatever else I want to do? Actually, it's almost as if it's saying, God, it would be unfair to expect me to do something with my own money that I didn't agree to do. You see how we like and see fair in certain ways? How it pertains to us, maybe not so much how it pertains to others. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Here's a few observations. Here's the first observation. Fair is fair. Fair is fair. That's what the Lord seems to be telling us at the beginning of this parable. The landowner asked the first group what they agreed to. What did they agree to? You give a day's work and you'll get a day's pay. What did they have the right to expect? A day's pay, a denarius. What did they get paid? A denarius. So if the landowner represents God in this parable, is God fair? Yes. Fair is fair. They agree to work for a day's wage, and God gave them in this parable, the landowner represents God, God gives them a day's wage. Fair is fair. They got what they agreed to, but they don't see it that way. Why? Because those who were hired last got the same, and the first workers felt cheated. Here's my second observation. Fair is not feelings based. Fair is not feelings based. What's truly fair should be objective. Yet, I would suggest that most of the time when we say something is fair or unfair, it's subjective. We didn't feel like something was fair. It's feelings based. We think something isn't fair because we don't feel like it's fair. The problem is that feelings can be misleading. How many of you ever felt like doing something, so you did it, and then you were asked, why did you do that? And you said, because I felt like it. And then you learned that your feelings had misled you. That you should not have done what you felt like doing because what you did was not a wise thing to do, or was not a loving thing to do, or was not an obedient thing to do. Sometimes our feelings get it wrong, and they mislead us. Here's something that I've learned over the years. When my feelings have misled me is almost always when I've misread expectations. And I get up in my feelings and I feel like I've been cheated of something. I feel like I've been treated unfairly. Most of the time I can trace it back, and my misled feelings were based off of misread expectations. I had an expectation for whatever reason that something would happen. When that didn't happen, then I felt like I had been wronged. But in reality, I was the one that came up with the expectation. It wasn't something that had been promised to me. It wasn't something that had been agreed to. It was just something that in my own mind, one way or another, whether it's like these workers, like, oh, well, logic says if they get this amount for this amount of work, then I should get much more than that for much more work. Like, logically, that's how my mind's going to work. And so my expectations go along with that. But I misread the situation. I misread what was happening. I didn't look at what was promised. I just looked at what my own expectations. And when my own expectations weren't met, my feelings got hurt. I got sad or I got mad. Why? Because of unmet expectations. But those expectations weren't based on somebody else's word or promise or an agreement that I had made with them. but based on my own imagination, based on my own conclusion, my own expectations. You know why this parable messes with most people? Does this parable mess with you a little bit? Like, wait a minute, that's not fair. Because most of us identify with the first group. It is easier to be offended. It is easier to feel slighted than to feel and experience gratitude. It's almost as if we are hardwired to be selfish. It is almost as if we are hardwired to just see negative things, to see ourselves and to put ourselves in the position of the one who has been cheated, and to be offended, and to be the one that can cry out, "That's not fair," even if reality would say it was certainly fair, because in our parable, they got what they agreed to, which is, by definition, fair. So don't have to raise your hand, but I'm just going to guess that almost every single one of us very quickly identified with the first group that was hired, not the second group, not the third group, not the fourth group, and certainly not the fifth group. But we identified ourselves with the first group. Again, because it is much easier to be offended or to feel slighted than to be filled with gratitude and to see the goodness of God. And that's why, one of the reasons why anyway, it's important that we remember that fair is not feelings based. I believe the parable gives us a pretty clear answer to the question, is God fair? But we've got to get past the feelings. Was God fair to the first group? Absolutely. He was fair to the first group. But something this parable tells us is that God was more than fair. It also tells us this: fair is a fraction of what God is. So pay attention. There's 5 different groups that are talked about that were hired and that were paid a denarius. They each got a day's wage. Only one of those 5 groups had to work a day to get a day's wage. So if I do my math right, 80% of them, 4 out of 5, got way more than what they had bargained for. Way more than fair. Is God fair? God is better than fair. In this story, 4 out of 5 would say, if really to answer honestly, God was better than fair to me. I got way more than I had bargained for. I only worked this amount of the day, but I got paid this much for the day. 4/5 of them were treated better than fair. Second group was hired at 9 a.m. and they got paid for a full day. Is God fair? Would they say? Absolutely. Third group got hired at noon, paid for a full day. Is God fair? Better than fair. Third group, fourth group, fifth group, better than fair. I don't know about you, but I'm glad that God is better than fair. In my mind, that all leaves us with this thought. You can have gratitude or attitude, but not both. You can have gratitude or attitude, but not both. If you choose the first, let me give you 3 suggestions that I believe will help. Some of the things that we see from this passage even. And I'll make it a little easier for you to write down notes. Okay, these are the ABCs. So first one starts with A, second one starts with B. Guess what this third one starts with? We'll see. A, avoid the comparison trap. Former President Teddy Roosevelt said it this way: comparison is the thief of joy. If the first ones would have gotten paid and not known what the others gotten paid, would they have been pretty happy with the day's wage? Absolutely. When payday comes, are you pretty happy? Absolutely. When I'm working at the school, one of the things that I'll hear every other Friday, it's Friday, and it's not just any Friday, it's payday. They may not think that they get paid what they're worth getting paid, and they may have something to that. But the reality is, what's fair is fair. What they agreed to work for, they are happy. When that day comes, like, woohoo, it's payday. But when we start looking around and going, they get paid more than I do, and I think my work's harder than their work. I mean, this can happen. I don't hear it at the school, but it certainly could happen. You could see, like, certain classes that some of the teachers have to teach, some of the students that some of the teachers have to have in their class, and the other teachers don't have those students in their class. Like, I deserve a pay raise. I thought earlier in the year I deserved a pay raise just because of certain circumstances. Like, I think, don't pay me enough to deal with what I'm dealing with right now. But things really get messed up when we start comparing to one another. Oh, I don't get paid what they get paid, or I don't have what they have. That's not fair. But before that, we thought it was great. So you can have gratitude, or you can have attitude, but not both. If you want attitude, compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to others. You're guaranteed to have attitude if you compare yourself to others. You'll either be stuck on yourself type attitude, like, yeah, look at what I'm making, or you'll have attitude of, look at what they're making. Can you believe that? But you won't have gratitude. If you want to have gratitude, avoid the comparison trap. Second one, if you want to have gratitude, base your expectations on His promises, not your premises. The first group expected to get more because they felt they deserved more. The premise was their theory, their understanding, because this group got paid this amount and I worked more than them, then I deserve more pay. If you want to have gratitude, not attitude, base your expectations on His promises, not your premises. Those that get an attitude with God are usually the ones that think God isn't fair, because their expectations are misled. They're expecting God to do something that God has not promised to do. And if you are expecting God to do something that God has not promised to do, you will likely end up with an attitude and not gratitude. The third and final thing that I would say and suggest to you, if you want to have gratitude instead of attitude, is to count your blessings. Count your blessings. In other words, think about how good God has truly been to you. Because I get it, friends. There's been times in my life when I'm struck with that's not fairitis. Like, really? This happens? That's not fair. That doesn't happen to them. Really? This happened? That didn't happen to them. How come I'm the one that has this happen? Or how come I'm the one that doesn't get this to happen? How come this works for them, but it doesn't work for me? I've been there before. And it's the comparison trap, but it's also the failure to count my own blessings. And then when I avoid the comparison trap, and I base my expectations on His promises, not my own premises, But then I start to truly count my blessings and see how good, man, God has been so good to me. And this isn't bragging on me. This is bragging on God has been so good. Has God been good to you? We say around here, and I know we're not the only ones. You can go to almost any church in America and hear, God is good. And all the time. And we know it. And we say it. But sometimes I don't know if we really believe it, because we're the same ones that are going, that's not fair. And yet, if we would count our blessings, I think the only conclusion that we could come to is that God has been so much more than fair. God has been so, so good to me. So my friends, avoid the comparison trap. Base your expectations on His promises, not your promises, and count your blessings. Try it. Name them one by one. And see all the good that the Lord has done. Father, we thank you. We praise you. You are so good. Thank you for being more than fair. We sang about it earlier. Maybe we didn't realize it. But to sing the words amazing grace is an indication of recognition that you are more than fair. Because fair would indicate that we deserved it. And we certainly do not deserve your grace. But thank you that you are a God that is so much more than fair. You're kind, you're loving, and you've been so, so good to us. May we reflect on that, and may we live out of a joyous heart that is filled with gratitude, because we recognize your goodness in and through our own lives. I pray this in and for your name. Amen. And invite you to stand if you're able as we sing.